A window of opportunity has opened.
Yes.
I've got, as of this recording, I've got 7 hours and 29 minutes left. That's the length of this window of opportunity. Unlike talking about domain names that I might want to buy on a podcast and then not acting on them immediately, I've learned my lesson.
Wait, are you in line for Taylor Swift tickets?
No, even better.
Beyonce tickets?
A life-changing opportunity here. And again, this auction will have closed long before this podcast goes up. Rare, R-A-R-E, capital Rare, Aperture Brown Diner Mug.
It's on eBay.
There is a single one of these Aperture Science 70s Princess Belle mug, brown, harvest gold. You're not drinking out of yours right now, I see. We didn't quite synergize that well.
I'm afraid to use mine now.
It's in pretty good shape. There's one little nick on the paint on the backside, which whatever.
You can fix that.
$26 starting bid. Buy it now price $51. How bad do I want this? I'm not sure.
Wow. I mean,
I'm not sure.
$51. That's a pretty good mug, but I can.
You could probably intuit by the fact that this auction is still up that I have not wanted it. Buy it now bad.
Yeah, but have you wanted it $26 bad, or are you just trying to swoop in with the last? This could be the last one in the world, you know.
So that's you never know.
It could be the very last one. I mean, I know I have one, but mine is a precious family heirloom. I passed it down to my child, and I expect her to pass it down to her children.
Of course, that'll pay for somebody's college education someday.
I don't think that's true, but maybe. Maybe if the liberals have their way, Brad.
Maybe. When was the last time you bid on something on eBay is my question.
2007.
That's weirdly specific, but okay.
I bought an Xbox on eBay.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, that's not reason enough then to maybe looking for information on how the process may have changed. Are there do's and don'ts? If nobody noticed this, if this has flown entirely under the radar, can I just swoop in with a bid at the last minute and get it, or is it more complicated now?
God, no. There's a whole service ecosystem around getting that last minute swoop in. So expressing interest early, almost always a mistake because you're just going to drive up your future price.
Yes, it has 0 bids. I was at least that smart.
Yeah. The beyond that, I don't really know. I do know that somebody listed. Somebody in the Discord listed their Pokemon Emerald game the other day, and then immediately was banned from eBay irrevocably. So, maybe don't sell Pokemon Emerald on eBay, but probably you're fine buying a mug would be my guess.
Was it a repro? Was it counterfeit?
No, I think that the assumption is that there is a large counterfeit problem where people make a bootleg copy of the game with all of the Pokemons unlocked in it, so that then you don't have to play the game. Which actually, as somebody who has no real I got no beef with. I'm the wrong age to have engaged with Pokemon. Okay,
I know where this is going. Yes,
yeah, sounds like a great way to engage with that game to me.
Yes, it sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, now you've speaking of repros, can't you kind of just get anything you want printed on any mug these days?
I don't think you can get it. The problem, well, maybe you could. The brown is the problem, I think, on that one.
What do you mean?
On the brown mug.
Why is the brown the problem? You can get
it's a specific brown.
Well, there are plenty of brown, like Princess Brown mugs that look good enough, close enough.
Oh, see, but the kind of richness and texture of that glaze that they did, it's got a I assume that artisans at Valve were in the kilns applying the glazes. They're probably toxic because, that seems like a very Portal thing to do, is to make the glazes really dangerous for the workers who made them. And, it adds a lot to my appreciation of the coffee.
If you actually came to me and said Valve has a working kiln, I would believe you.
I mean, look, have you looked at the Twitter auction?
No.
Do you know So the bad man in charge of Twitter now is unloading a bunch of the old shit from the Twitter offices on an auction site. It starts on September, I think.
I think somebody on one of my mini Discords sent me a link to some nice coffee machine that their office is auctioning off. And I looked at that and I was like, I wouldn't touch anything that was in that office with a 10-foot pole.
Well, okay. So I looked at the coffee machine because it's a $10,000 La Marzocco espresso machine is the one that I was looking at, but it requires 240 volt power. So it's like I'd have to put a dryer vent in my coffee station in the kitchen, a dryer plug, which seems a bit excessive. You also need filtered water and the whole thing for the deal. So anyway, you can buy everything from chairs and tables and desks and stuff like that, all the way up to, you could buy the sign that was attached to the side of the building before the Yahoos started prying it off a few months ago.
I have no idea what that would cost. That's actually the one thing funny enough to maybe be worth doing.
Well, so everything starts at $25.
Huh.
Yeah. They're not doing chairs. I think they must have done chairs through a normal office furniture liquidator. But the desks in the conference, you get, if you want an 85-inch commercial TV from one of the conference rooms, that's a service they can provide. Starts at $25.
Okay, the longer this cold open goes, the worse auction decisions are being made. Let's start the show.
You should just get the mug and be done. Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad.
And I had a follow-up to the cold open. I forgot what it was.
You confided that you slept like 3 hours right before we started this last night, and I was just like, I'm just gonna wait and see what he's got in the chamber.
Okay, I got it back. Okay. I pulled it back.
All right.
I pulled it back.
All right, let's hear it.
Did you hear about Control?
But the video game?
No. Well, I mean, okay, it's a good video game, but no, not. Did you hear what happens when you open Task Manager in Windows 10 or Windows 11 and hold down the Control key?
No.
When you open Task Manager and you sort your processes by usage, like CPU, memory usage, whatever. You know how they bounce around? It's hard to find the one that you're looking for. That like something hangs, it's locked up. You need to find out what's eating all your CPU cycles.
Sure,
but they bounce around. So then you look for the one that's eating it, and then you resort them by name, and you scroll down until you find the one that you saw popping around at the top of the list a minute ago. You don't have to do that. You can just hold down Control, and it freezes them in place.
Oh. But still alphabetical, not sorted by usage, like still.
No. It sorts by you can sort by usage, and it freezes it in time when you press the Control key.
I see.
So you can control.
Oh yes, of course.
Control your process list.
That's something everyone should aspire to do.
I'll be here all week.
I'm not in front of a Windows machine right now, so I cannot verify what you're telling me.
You are significantly less excited about this than I expected.
Look, I spend a lot of time looking at a lot of usages is in different operating systems these days. I mean, look, HTOP has the exact same problem.
Yeah.
Those things, they never sit still.
But you can control.
That's true.
Control.
Control your HTOP?
Control. I don't know if you can control your HTOP actually, but you can
maybe not.
Control your process list. Okay, I'm done now.
You know what I would love for them to integrate, and maybe they would have to work with Google on this, or maybe they would never do this because it's a third party, although they could do it for Edge. Anyway, you know how it'll essentially list every process that Chrome is using. I assume each one of those is a separate tab. I don't know for sure. Have you ever, I don't even know if you use Chrome anymore, but maybe Firefox is the same way. Have you ever expanded your browser in Task Manager?
Oh yeah, there's a bazillion threads in there. Yeah.
Yeah. So occasionally you'll open a web page that's got probably some ad unit or something that sends your PC fans flying at a million miles an hour, right? Because I would love to, and people, I'm bracing for people to be like, hey, you can totally do this, and I just haven't noticed it. But I would love to be able to kill that one tab from Task Manager because you can see which process is driving your fans crazy.
Brad,
but you have no way to pair that with the actual tab that is causing the bad behavior.
Brad, I have good news for you.
Yes.
Hit Command and Escape in your browser.
Okay, I'm on a Mac. Nothing's happening.
Maybe Control and Escape then. It's difficult to say which one it is.
Also, nothing happening.
Okay, well then open the 3-dot menu and go down to More Tools and then go to Task Manager. Oh, it's Shift and Escape on Chrome. It's Control and Escape on Firefox.
Well, look at that.
Yeah, it's a little Task Manager. Oh, no, it's Shift and Escape on Firefox too. Okay, well, that was a bad bit. Look, 3 hours sleep.
Nope, it's fine. Staying in. Hey, good to know. Okay, well, maybe I've gotten my wish.
Yeah, so you can that gives you the thing that lets you see how much CPU and memory each tab on your browser is using. I only ever have one tab on Chrome because I only use it for our streaming. The Jitsi call and occasionally like Google Meet calls.
Well, la-di-da. I'm thinking about switching, maybe.
Firefox is pretty good these days.
I was just thinking about giving Vivaldi a try, maybe.
I like the Four Seasons.
Sure. I think Vivaldi is the Opera people, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's the new...
Oh, it's a fork of Opera?
Or a successor to Opera or something. It's still... sense. Oh my God, why am I blanking on Chromium? The rendering engine of Chrome? It's Chromium, right?
Yeah, that's Chromium.
Yeah, like I still like using Chromium-based browsers just because it feels like compatibility is probably highest. Like everything is tested against Chrome primarily, right?
I mean, I haven't had compatibility problems with Firefox in about 10 years at this point. It seems like
we Jitsi occasionally does not work great with it for us, but anyway,
it's fair. I did just literally say I keep Chrome on my computer to use Jitsi and Google Meet. So
yes, now that you mention it,
yes.
Anyway, we're not here to talk about web browsers, or are we?
We are here to talk about massive compatibility issues, though.
Yeah, that's always fun. That's a great time.
It's enormous. Hey, remember when you got a television and the Xbox 360 like version 1 came out and they were like, look, we're going to put there's this new port. It's called HDMI. You're going to love it. It's one plug. You just plug it in. It's completely idiot proof. You don't have to like you don't have to match your reds and your blues and your greens and your whites and your yellows and your other whites. No, none of that. It's just you're just going to click that thing, snap it in there, and it's going to carry your sound and your video all on one cable, both ways. It's amazing. It's a magical piece of technology, and you're never going to have to think about this again. Guess what, Brad?
Yes.
You have to think about it again.
They had to think about it again.
Yeah.
I remember actually the first 360 didn't even have HDMI. Speaking of incompatibilities, remember you had to buy the second model to get that.
You know, it's always compatible with everything analog. Could you use the HD DVD player with the non-HDMI Xbox 360s?
Oh gosh, I don't know. That's a good question. How did the thing connect to the Xbox? Was it over USB? Yeah, it's USB because we had one USB, in the office.
USB 2.
Somebody in a mailbag sent us, like way after the format died, somebody sent us their HD DVD drive and all of their movies.
I bought one on eBay for about $50 and ripped all my HD DVDs. For whatever reason, at some point at Future, a bunch of people brought HD DVDs and just threw them on the free table by the elevator. And I got almost a full set. They're all dead now.
You need a copy of King Kong? We got you covered.
Yeah.
Yes. That format. Boy, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah, that's a different day.
The HD DVD format did not last. Those discs were very prone to dying.
But you and I both are notable 1080p holdouts at home.
Yes.
Mainly, I think and just to be clear, I don't think I would still be a 1080p holdout if it weren't for the Panasonic Plasma and the fact that my wife really likes that TV a lot and is oddly attached to it.
I think are in the same boat for the same reason. The Panasonic Plasma that we got, we have slightly different models, but from around the same era. The thing has punched above its weight for so long. It was like cheap when I got it because Plasma was on its way out.
Oh, mine was not cheap when I got it because Plasma was hot shit when I bought mine.
I bought mine in 2012, which was the second to last year the Panasonic even made Plasmas, and by then it was both cheaper and better looking than all the LCD TVs on the market at the time. And I was like, man, why is nobody buying these? Anyway, it's held up extremely well.
Yeah.
If I was still on a crappy 2010-ish era LCD TV with a cold cathode why is that so hard to say? Cold cathode backlight.
Yeah, that's a no for me, dog.
I would have dumped that long ago, but Plasma has held up quite well. The other thing is, like, as long as I am perpetually pondering my living situation and might end up going somewhere at some point, I don't want to move TV.
Yeah.
And so it's very easy to just shed your old TV when it's old.
Well, and like, it's just to be clear, this has required a fair amount of intestinal fortitude at this point, because like you look at like a 75-inch TCL mini LED backlit TV at this point, fairly nice.
Oh yeah,
fairly inexpensive. Like often you see them on sale for $500.
Everything looks better than what we have now. Like the other strategy I've had to employ is that I'm better off not knowing what I don't know. So I just avoid looking at other TVs and then it's fine.
Well, I was going to say, so we went to Palm Desert last month and they have a nice TCL, like it's a Roku TV with all the Dolby Vision and your 15 different HDR formats and all that stuff. And It's an enormous pain in the ass. Like getting Plex working always takes me about a week to figure out what I need to do to make Plex look right. And like the consoles you plug in, you have to change a bazillion settings. And then like it's a path that's fraught with peril, which is why we're here. Cause your folks, you're in North Carolina this week.
Yes. I've helped them with a TV upgrade this week. Because they were on exactly the situation I just described, which is a what CCFL, is that the term, cold cathode fluorescence?
Cold cathodes are just fluorescent tubes that are a specific frequency and like non-flickery usually, I think is the thing. Yes,
they were on an LCD from 2010.
Think of it as ground effects for your eyeballs.
Yes. They're on a very old TV that like was still going but didn't look amazing, and just decided it was time.
What did they do with the old TV when it
is sitting in the floor?
That's okay. Classic. What's the eventual disposition of it going to be?
Probably donate it, I think is the plan. Unless there's a work area in the back of the basement that doesn't really get used much anymore. But there's a much older TV back there currently. So
got it. Okay.
This TV could become the workshop TV.
The shit runs downhill method.
And that old TV, which is from like 2006, I think, might get donated.
Okay. So what did they end up? Were you part of the purchasing choice, or was this?
Yes.
Okay.
No, my mom is also quite technically inclined and did a ton of reading herself as well. She worked with a lot of technology in her career.
Did they hit you with a budget? Like, here's what we want to spend, or was it just
not really. And I started out looking at lower end, like mini LED TVs are getting like surprisingly cheap and good.
Mini LED, yeah, that's what the one that's in the Palm Desert place is, and it's all like it is not as good as like an LG OLED, but it is very good, and the brightness is intense even when it's sunny outside. You can watch it during the daytime easily.
Yeah, I think we've talked about mini LED before. It's got a ton of LEDs in the backlight, and it can turn them on and off in a very granular fashion to try to match the brightness of the image to keep the contrast high, and et cetera, et cetera.
So that on dark areas of the picture, they're not the LCD screen, the screen of grids isn't trying to block out the light. The light's just off behind it, which makes a big difference.
Yes.
It's not perfect, but it's pretty good.
So their old TV was a 55 inch, decided that a 65 would be a good upgrade for the space. They're getting older and the size it's helpful.
Yeah, they can put the font bigger. They don't have to put their reading glasses on to watch the TV.
Having a bigger screen. I mean, even I can attest. Eventually having a bigger screen is good as your eyes start to fail you.
Okay, so let me ask a theoretical question for you. If Twitter is selling, say, 100-inch video wall, which is like an 8K bunch of big screens that are seamless between them, and you need like a dedicated command and control setup. Yes, and the auction starts at $25. And it has a thing that says, you need to get a licensed professional to come in and disassemble this and then set it back up where you're going. That's a dumb thing to buy, right?
I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. You've got $25 probably.
It's true.
That thing's not going to sell for 25. That thing's going to sell for, I don't know. I don't know. Like I want to say like, that'll end up getting bid up to thousands of dollars, but maybe it won't.
Well, because you have to pick it up in San Francisco. They're not shipping.
Yes, true.
Yeah, so it's a limit anyway. Okay, so
there's a lot of people with a lot of money in San Francisco.
That's true. So so I should get the video wall probably.
Probably not.
What did they end up getting?
Should I just cut to the chase? They have an LG C2 now.
Ooh, nice.
Which is not where I expected things to go. I started out looking at last year's mini LED models. Like Hisense is so there's like the stratification in TVs is pretty interesting lately. Like obviously OLEDs are kind of top of the heap right now, and LG has been the only game in town there, but Samsung and Sony now are finally in the market with OLEDs as well.
Yeah.
And then there's like all of those companies also make LED TVs. They make mini LED and regular full array LED TVs as well if you want that. But then there's the TCLs. And I guess Vizio started this, right? Vizio was the classic original kind of mid-range, low-cost, high-value
tier. And it's like, it's always been a little unclear to me how they actually make money. My assumption is that they're collecting data because the TVs are all internet connected now. And my assumption is they're collecting and selling data or running ads on their UI, which means that they see some like post sale revenue on the purchase.
Yeah, that's been the Roku model, right? Like you get the hardware out the door for extremely cheap and then serve a ton of ads on it to make it up.
Yep.
So like Vizio, I think kicked that off like 15 plus years ago, but like TCL and now Hisense, I think, are the two big ones that I see mostly in that space. Vizio is still out there as well, for sure.
Yeah. How does LG differentiate their lines these days? Is it still like the high refresh rate and the HDR, the Dolby Vision stuff is limited to the higher end models, or is it
in the OLED space or in general?
In the OLED space.
So I only looked at the C range, the C models.
Okay.
So actually I take that back. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here a little bit. LG has an entry level OLED model now. It's the A series. They've always had it's always been B, C, and G from low to high in terms of features. I
don't understand why A isn't the good one. I guess it's because they don't give A's in Korea. Maybe I don't know.
I guarantee that there are companies that go in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
In turn to imply quality. Actually, parsing everybody's modeling numbers has been a real fun exercise in this. Like LG uses the last digit of the year in their model number to make it clear.
Oh, okay. So that's a 2022 model.
So like the C2 is the 2022 model. That's last year's, but like Samsung and I think also Sony use letters. Like the S95B was Samsung's model last year. Now they're on the S95C. Right. Sony's weirdly in the middle of the alphabet. They're on like J and K and L for some reason. It's weird. It's goofy.
This seems like they looked at like the German car model naming scheme and was like, you know what, this is a great idea. We should just knock this off and make it somehow slightly more confusing.
Yeah. Anyway, like you asked about budget and stuff. Like I was just looking as cheap as possible. I was like, all right, they are not as discerning as giant nerds like me and you. Like, they'll probably be fine with anything.
Possibly you come by it honest, though.
Yes. I was looking at like last year's Hisense models, which were in the 700 to 800 range now. Mm-hmm. But should we talk about art? Okay, now I'm going to embarrass myself because I have never decided on how to pronounce the very popular TV review website. You know the one?
Artings?
Okay, thank you. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, I always Artings and DP Review, which was the digital photography review.
Okay. Is that from like the early HDTV era, like DLP and stuff like that?
Well, DP Review was for like SLRs, DSLRs, and like okay. they were the place to go if you wanted to know which SLR or mirrorless camera to buy.
Oh, or do they do TV stuff?
No, they didn't. But to me, hey, we're going to put the initials of the things we're testing.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Anyway,
I see.
Like they're in the same category in my sleep addled brain.
Yes. Okay. Got it. Okay. Artings. Let's just go with that pronunciation. Yeah. Anyway, like they are the de facto TV review resource these days, from what I can tell. Like that is the thing that comes up in all the Google search results, from what I found.
Okay.
They're very comprehensive. If you have not been there before, rtings.com. I've known them as the screen review place for some years now. Monitors as well.
The screens are all generally pretty good these days, right?
Yeah, yes, for sure.
It's not like the old days where your viewing angle, if you got the wrong TV, your viewing angle would be bad. You'd be sitting at like 30 degrees off the TV and like half the screen would be blacked out or something weird like that.
No, well, actually viewing angles is totally a thing. The Hisense that we originally thought we were going to get the Hisense, but their seating arrangement is such that, especially when other family is over, like the off angle viewing is actually an important thing. And the Hisense uses an LCD VA panel. You know VA from gaming monitors. Yeah. It's like TN, VA, and IPS are the big LCD types.
It's a technique by which the panels are created.
Right. Yes. They all have ups and downs, but the VA panels have pretty bad off angle viewing quality, and that was actually a pretty big drawback for the way their seating is arranged and stuff. So that was a drawback there. Anyway, long story short, I'd sent my mom Artings and she got to looking at the like best of lists. And there was a bit of creep from last year's Hisense to this year's Hisense to then I didn't even say the word OLED to her. She came to me and she was like, what about these OLEDs? Like they say these are really good.
It's a thing where like if you keep TV, like I don't know if your parents, I assume your parents are keeping TVs as long as we do because they have a TV that's old. Like I'm kind of the I would rather buy one thing and have it last a really long time than do smaller incremental upgrades at a lower cost.
Yeah. And take sales floor or sales guy recommendations with a grain of salt, I guess. The guy that at Best Buy that came up to help us actually did seem quite knowledgeable, but we were looking at the Hisenses there and he was like, no. It's like, for reliability reasons and stuff, I would stay away there. I'm sure they're fine for most people, but he put a little seed of doubt in there as well about that stuff. But like the bigger thing is they kept their last TV for 12, 13 years, right?
Yeah.
Not to be too morose, but my dad said it himself, like this might be the last TV they ever buy.
Oh boy.
Right.
I think that about myself sometimes though.
Yes. So like there was a bit of that of like, hey, like we're going to keep this. We may never buy another TV. Like we should just get a good one. But the other thing is it was really the prices were not that different. Like that was actually the thing that pushed it over the edge because like a brand new this year's model OLED is still extremely expensive, especially if you get up into bigger sizes. But the discounts on last year's models are pretty significant.
Yeah.
Last year's Samsung and LG at 65 inch were both down to 1600, which is not that much more than the Hisense and the TCL that they were looking at.
And the thing I was going to say, my understanding is that like the thing that's changing from year to year is like the HDMI spec and even less so that now since 2.1 is kind of across the board now. Like there was a period of time in 2020, 2021 when you probably couldn't even buy TVs if I didn't pay attention then, but like there wasn't. In order to get the new HDMI spec and the high refresh rate stuff and the HDR stuff and all the different bits and pieces you needed, you had to buy the expensive one. And I don't think that's the case anymore, right?
Yes. I haven't looked at the B models for the LG OLEDs. I mean, that's what I've spent the most time looking at. I can't speak to the others as much. I know that new A model entry level LG OLED does not have HDMI 2.1, which is a pretty big. If you're just going to watch TV on it, that's fine. If you're only going to watch TV and movies, that's not a problem. It's specifically for games, though, not having that is a pretty big drawback because you're not going to get high refresh and variable refresh and stuff like that. But
yeah, the variable refresh rate is, I think, more important than the high refresh rate, even for most games, probably.
Yes, the A2, last year's A2 is like cheaper than a lot of the LCD TVs at this point. It's really? Like $1,200. It's like $1,200 now for last year's entry level LG OLED
at like a 50, 60 inch size.
So that's for 65.
Wow.
Yeah, like it seems like this happens a lot. Like the Hisenses and TCLs have crept up in price as they've established themselves in the market. Of course, I guess they want to broaden their product range, right?
I mean, that makes sense.
That's the same price as the TCL that they were looking at,
So okay. So you end up going with the OLED.
Yes,
so you went with the LG.
It's a whole thing. I don't know how much you want to get into it. Samsung is new in OLEDs. The last year's model we were looking at because it was cheaper turned out to be their first generation OLED, which seemed like really asking for trouble for something you want to last for like a decade plus.
And are they making their own OLEDs or are they buying from somebody else?
Yes, that's actually the big thing is that as far as I know, LG's been the only OLED panel manufacturer to date until Samsung entered the market.
Well, at scale, they were selling to Sony. Like Sony's been selling OLEDs for a long time, but they were just buying LG OLEDs and slapping them in Sony boxes. So.
Yes. So Sony has switched, or they may just have a stratified product line, but their high-end OLED is now a Samsung panel, not an LG panel. There are differences there. I can't get too deep into. Like LG's OLEDs are white OLED, Samsung's OLEDs are blue OLED. I believe that's the term for the type of panel it is. Which I think just has to do with the way it produces color. There's a lot of FUD out there about the early Samsung OLEDs, like firmware issues, reliability stuff, like some long-term testing has shown that they seem very prone to burn in.
Ooh, yeah, LG had problems with that 10 years ago when their things were new, and it seems to be a solid problem now.
Yes, they seem to mostly have ironed out burn-in issues. So that was another thing. It was just, this is too big of a roll of the dice to take a chance on a pretty new product where LG's been making these things for 7-8 years now.
Well, and it wasn't that much more expensive either, which
it was the exact same price. They were the Samsung and LG were the same price. Different people have different budgets, of course, but it is hard for me to envision buying the new model of these TVs. Like the price is so much more.
Well,
we're talking, I don't know, 60 to 80% more in some cases.
For me, I've gone down the process and just not pulled the trigger a couple times on this. And where I always end up is buying the nice one from the year before is a better option than buying the cheap one from this year.
That seems like exactly the way to go. And the features have matured and also trickled down into the lower models somewhat, to the point that like it seems like you're way better off waiting for that. It's a pretty specific window from what I can tell, because it's basically from the point the new models are on the market to the point the ones they already made from last year are gone, you know?
Yeah.
So you got to move pretty quickly to look for the deals, but there are definitely deals to be had.
We're in that window now, I think.
Yeah. This should we talk about HDR? This led to a crash course in HDR.
Well, yeah. So I was going to say, like, we're overdue for an HDR episode. It's both less and more complicated than I expected when we dug into it.
Yes.
So HDR, everybody, I think, conflates HDR and color gamut, where color gamut is the sheer number of colors that the display can reproduce. Like on an old monitor or computer monitor, that's represented by that NTSC curve, which is like 16 million colors, mostly in the ranges where your eyes have a lot of resolution because of the cone and rod. Because of the way the cone, I think it's cones are color, I can't remember, are distributed in the back of your eye and which ones do which colors and all that. The HDR in theory only represents the luminance, the difference between the dimmest pixels and the brightest pixels on the screen. So it's kind of, if like in the audio metaphor is that color gamut is the bit rate, and luminance, the HDR is the brightness. Is the loudness rather.
I'm not sure how helpful this analogy.
Yeah. Okay.
is.
Okay. Bad analogy.
Understand the concepts.
But anyway, in reality, in the modern era of HDR, typically you don't buy an HDR TV if it doesn't also support a wider color gamut. Yeah. So you do get both more colors and brighter and darker, bigger difference between brighter and darker. Now, nothing supports the full range of any of these HDR standards. Oh, yeah. So like the maximum number of nits that the display supports literally doesn't matter, because even like commercial mastering displays only go up to 4,000 nits. And I think everything supports at least 10,000 nits, which, Jesus, if you turn 10,000 nits on in your living room, you'd have to put sunglasses on. It's like a Dolby Cinema display projector in shutter glass in 3D mode.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I think home TVs have only like broken 1,000 nits in the last handful of years. Like it's still, there's still a ton of headroom there. Real quick, I should mention the whole reason we were looking at that Samsung model is it's the first quantum dot OLED on the market. I'm sure you've seen like QLED or QD LED in LCD TV space.
Yeah, that was their marketing thing to sound kind of like OLED, but not be OLED, but be better than LCD.
Yes, but it is a real technology. It's an extra layer on the screen that uses these quantum dots, which are like it's a nano coating something. Yeah, like it's kind of a focusing agent. That the upshot is wider color gamut and brighter is why. Yeah, it's a big deal. And so the Samsung is tested, proven, broader color palette and significantly brighter, which is why we even looked at it in the first place. But again, like all those downsides with reliability concerns.
Yeah. And so the other thing, I mean, we talked about OLEDs before, but just as to recap, the difference between OLEDs and LCDs is LCDs require a backlight and then filter that light to produce color. OLEDs generate the color natively. So they're both the color, they generate the light and the color at the same time on the same thing. So there's less, you're not making, like, LCDs are inherently making a thing dimmer to make the colors come out, which means that they then have to have a bigger, brighter backlight and a bunch of other stuff. Anyway, so HDR, there's a bunch of different formats for HDR. The original one is HLG, which is part of the ATSC 3.0 spec, which defines broadcast TV in North America. It's also part of the international one, which I didn't write down what that one is, because
who is ATSC?
American Advanced Telecom something or other.
Advanced Television Systems Committee.
Yeah, it's the successor to NTSC.
Oh, okay, of course, yes.
Yeah,
of course.
So ATSC started when they started doing HD broadcasts in the early 2000s, and like if you buy an HD tuner card for your computer, it's going to support one of the ATSC standards.
Sure.
So HLG was part of ATSC3, which rolled out in like mid 2010s, 2016, 2017, something like that. It's back compatible with SDR, with standard dynamic range stuff. So if you but only on TVs that support the right color container, which is the BT 2021, which means if you bought, basically what it means is your old standard def TV or standard dynamic range TV won't work right with it, but newer standard dynamic range TVs that are not HDR compatible will display the HDR stuff correctly, which was a problem with, like, that was a thing that was relevant 8 years ago and probably less so now, because I think it's probably pretty hard to buy a non-HDR TV at this point. The other thing about HDR that we haven't said is that because the capabilities of each display are different, you can, like, HDR on its own doesn't mean a whole lot. Like, you can have an HDR TV that has a really narrow gamut and a really narrow luminance band, and it's going to look a little bit better than a standard def TV. But in reality, like, watching HDR content on an HDR TV is probably more impactful in my experience than the jump from 1080p to 4K.
Oh, absolutely. Just perceptually, it is much easier to see.
Yeah. So there's four main formats. There's some others that we're not going to talk about, but HLG is royalty free. It's the one that's part of ATSC 3.0. HDR10 is the main one, I think, at this point.
I think the most widely supported from what I've gathered.
Yeah, 10 and 10 plus are kind of 10 plus is an extension of 10, but 10 is an open format. There's no licensing charges. It's not backwards compatible with SDR. It's supported by pretty much everything. Dell, like, computer manufacturers, consoles, CE places, Apple, everybody supports it. The one problem with it is that the display determines how to handle information that the hardware is not capable of showing. So it knows, the display knows what it's kind of capable of, and it looks at the video stream coming in. It's like, well, okay, here we go. We're going to do the best we can. The HDR10 Plus spec was added by Samsung as a response to the Dolby Vision stuff that we'll talk about in a sec, and it's a free extension for creators. There's a little bit of a licensing charge, but it's like $10K annually, which isn't very much, and I don't believe it even has. My understanding is that it doesn't have a per device license, like the per device license is capped. So so you never pay more than 10K. Oh,
10K flat.
The 10K is the maximum you'll have to pay, which sounds like a lot for like you and me. It's nothing when you're talking about like a per TV sold cost or per phone call sold cost or whatever.
For a corporation big enough to make televisions, I mean, that's literally nothing.
Well, Samsung saw which way the wind was blowing and wanted to get out in front of it, I think. So. Yeah. The difference, the main thing that it adds is that it specifies the display limitations, and the video describes basically what should be displayed on any given frame in that video. So it says, okay, in this frame we want to focus on the dark stuff, in this frame we want to focus on the light stuff. So the TV doesn't have to make best guesses. It's based on what the person who did the mastery, the content mastering wanted. Which makes sense, because like if you're shooting a noir and it's a lot of darks, you want to have a lot more clarity in the dark area. If you're shooting outside scenes, having more clarity in the bright area is probably more important than having it in the dark area. Dolby Vision is the other big one.
Yes,
this is a closed proprietary, fairly expensive spec.
This was the big sticking point I found in looking around at stuff. And so, as you've kind of started to allude to here, Samsung seems to have taken a big stand against Dolby Vision and does not support it in any of their stuff, which was seemingly a drawback of that Samsung set. Obviously, we decided not to get it for other reasons as well, but by not supporting Dolby Vision, like you're not losing access to a lot of content, but you're losing access to what a lot of people think is the best version of that content. Because my understanding is generally anything that has any content that is encoded in Dolby Vision can also fall back to HDR10. Mm-hmm. So you're still going to get some HDR on, say, a Samsung TV that doesn't support Dolby Vision, but opinions are so varied out there. There are some people quite literally just like, oh, why would you even use HDR if it's not Dolby Vision? And other people are like, oh, I can't tell the difference. Like it's a thorny subject.
Well, and that's probably a reaction. That's probably a factor of the TVs having different capabilities, right? Like if you're buying a higher end TV and it doesn't support Dolby Vision, that feels like a tactical error to me. Whereas if you're buying the $500 Hisense, you're probably fine without Dolby Vision, right. I think.
Yes. Yeah. So you could question Samsung's strategy there then, because they're making very high end TVs without Dolby Vision.
Well, I think if the thing I couldn't get a good grasp on, and I don't have a good idea of, is how widely supported HDR10 is, because they're on paper they seem like they're pretty comparable. There's audio stuff that comes with the Dolby Vision stuff as well that we're not going to get into today because it's complicated. But the
audio formats, whole other Atmos and all that stuff. That stuff has also continued to grow in complexity.
Yeah, I guess, and you're right. Atmos is separate than Dolby Vision, but like usually those things come together in the content. If you're watching stuff streaming, it kind of matters less, because typically the streaming services encode everything in all the different formats and everything's just available. So your player, if you have a good player, an Apple TV or the LG stuff is pretty good. It just grabs what your TV supports and plays the best thing that your TV supports.
Yeah.
It's not like you're transcoding on the fly or down converting. Like your non-Dolby Vision supporting TV will grab the HDR version, not the HDR10 version, not the Dolby Vision, and then expect it to fail gracefully.
Yes. I think, actually I just found the link. I didn't think I was going to be able to find it. Although, can I read this in real time on this podcast? Probably not. I found Netflix has a page up about how they master in HDR for their stuff, at least. Which is quite informative, but the upshot that I've gotten from this is they do and this is for all their content. This is not what they're getting from studios.
This is the specs that they give production teams and mastery studios for stuff that they release. We have some colorists in the audience. This is a place where we should bring them in and do an episode about how this stuff works, because it's neat.
From what I gathered from some people in the Discord, studios are not giving HDR versions at all to Netflix or other streaming services. They're keeping that for themselves, for discs. Or for their own streaming services.
That's interesting.
So by and large, a lot of the third party content on Netflix doesn't have HDR at all. That's what I was told. I haven't looked that up. Anyway, what I gathered from this is that Netflix masters everything in Dolby Vision, and then they take that data, and then I'm not saying they literally hit export to HDR10, but it sounds like that's the version that gets all the real fine tuning attention, and then they use that to then create the other versions.
That makes sense, given that it's a higher bit depth. So Dolby Vision supports 12-bit color versus 10-bit color for the others. So I can see that. The other thing that Dolby Vision does that's neat is if you have the IQ. If you have a Dolby Vision IQ TV, it actually has an ambient light sensor and will adjust the brightness of the TV based on the conditions in the room.
Yes,
which is as somebody who has a giant ass window facing my TV, that sounds like an awesome feature that I'm definitely going to get on my next TV.
Yes, I'll say real quick, the biggest downside I saw on the Arting's review of the LG was that it was not as bright as the Samsung. They kind of like rated the brightness generally as middling to okay.
Yeah. But compared to your TV, it's going to be like the surface of the sun.
Yeah, or especially the TV they had before. But like even like the mini LED TVs can get brighter than any OLED on the market. Like that's the biggest advantage that the LED TVs have at this point is brightness. So like point being, the one they got, I'm trying to put this in context. The one they got was considered the worst brightness by far of all the ones that we looked at. And they have a lot of natural light in this room. It is totally viewable in like middle of the day with sun coming in the room. Like it is. I was like, really? This is considered not bright enough? This is extremely fine.
When a friend got his first OLED like 10 years ago now, probably. And I went over to the house to see it, and he has a huge window facing the TV. Norm's house has an enormous window facing the TV. Yes. And like the difference in brightness with the windows open was enormous, right? Also, it's worth mentioning the cold cathodes degrade and produce less color over time. So a 20-year-old cold cathode is probably going to be pretty dim by this point.
I hadn't even thought about that.
So it's
very dim. It is very dim.
Those are the four standards. For the most part, once you buy the TV and a receiver or soundbar, you kind of don't have to worry about this, but you do want to make sure that like if you buy a Dolby Vision TV, you want to buy a Dolby Vision soundbar or receiver and vice versa. Like you don't want to, if you don't, you're just spending money on something that you can't use for all intents and purposes.
That kind of goes for everything that we'll talk about here toward the end of the episode. pretty much every device in your chain needs to support a given feature for it to work at all.
I was going to say the bummer about all of this is that I think if you're buying a new TV and you have other stuff in that chain, you kind of have to just bite the bullet and replace everything at the same time.
So there was a whole thing. I was much. We'll get to it. We'll talk about maybe some of my specific like ups and downs that we've had with this setup toward the end. But they ended up having to replace their receiver too, which I was extremely angry about, and they didn't seem to mind as much. I mean, we bought a cheap one, but we'll get to it. But yes, like I guess that's good advice in general, is going into this thinking you can just. I wanted a drop-in TV replacement that would just work with what they had, and on paper it should have worked that way, but it ended up not working that way. So like, don't assume you're just going to be able to use all your old stuff, unfortunately.
So there's other stuff we should talk about is audio. There's a thing called eARC, which is a follow-on to ARC, ARC, which is the audio return channel. Basically, that defines the HDMI cables are a two-way connection, which means that you can send control signals back from the TV to the soundbar or to the receiver and vice versa. There's also an audio pipeline on that same connection that goes up to 37 megabits per second in the eARC modern era with HDMI 2.1. They include features like lip sync correction now as mandatory, because that's been a big problem for the 4K TVs, is that there's no synchronization. So you have to you either have automatic or manual correction for that now, which is nice. And you get things like turning on the TV turns on the receiver and whatever. So the upshot is you can plug in your Apple TV or your PlayStation, and turning on the PlayStation will turn on the TV and the receiver, and turning off the PlayStation will turn off the TV and receiver. Yeah. It's honestly one of my favorite things about even our old 1080p TV with CEC on is that I can turn on. The only remote in our living room is the Apple TV remote, because that's the only thing we use a remote for. And that whether it's ARC or eARC determines what support for audio codecs you have back from the TV to the soundbar as well. So what that means is you can plug something in to the TV ports, not just the receiver ports, and still get the good audio back to the receiver. In theory, that's always been hinky in my experience. Yeah, you should get everything over one cable, which is really convenient with the ARC stuff. Yep. With refresh rate, which is the other wild card on it, this was more difficult a couple of years ago before HDMI 2.1 was widespread. But with HDMI 2.1, there's enough bandwidth for a while. We were in a situation where the HDMI spec didn't provide enough bandwidth for high dynamic range and good audio and high refresh rate. I think we're past that now with 2.1 for the most part, it seems like.
Should I mention it now? I had saved this for the kind of weird ups and downs of setting this stuff up part at the end. But when you talk about, is HDMI 2.1 like good enough for the future? Do we have enough bandwidth? Everything in this space is now labeling itself as 8K.
So that's how you tell it's an HDMI 2.1 cable.
That's exactly it. And once you know that, it's fine. It's just kind of ridiculous, because there are no 8K screens on the market for consumers. Like it's a thing that basically does not exist. Like HDMI 2.1 technically can go up to 8K at 60 hertz, which is why they're saying that, because it's a good marketing term. But you really have to realize that across the board, and I don't just mean like on the sides of boxes of things, like the HDMI cables we bought are labeled as 8K. When I had to dig into receiver settings to enable HDMI 2.1 stuff, they labeled those settings as 8K enhanced. It is not clearly communicated in all cases that, hey, this actually means HDMI 2.1. It's just a silly marketing thing. It's a real testament to how poorly the branding on HDMI 2.2 on HDMI versions is thought out, that they have to go to that. Call it, I don't know, help me out here. Let's run a branding exercise. Just rebrand it HDMI 7, and then even numbers. I feel like call it HDMI Kablammo. Super extreme. And then people will know that it's the good one. Anyway. So refresh rate is a weird thing, because for a long time, I think the perception, at least for me, was that it was for games. And then somebody pointed out that 120 hertz is the least common multiple of 24 and 30. Yes. So 24 being the frame rate that movies are shot at, and 30 being the TV show frame rate for the most part, which
which means on a 120 hertz TV, you can watch movies without requiring 3:2 pull down, which is where like every third frame gets an extra second on a 60 hertz display,
or an extra draw. It draws
an extra draw. Yeah.
One extra time.
Yeah. You draw true 2 frames, 1 frame twice and 2 frames 3 times or something like. I can't, like, the upshot is look. This is why motion smoothing exists, is because the 3:2 pull down was bad and they just would start interpolating frames in between.
Yeah.
So anyway, turn off motion smoothing and set your movies to play at 120 hertz. Or if the TV supports it and does variable refresh rate, you can just set it to run at 24 hertz now for a lot of TVs as well, which also is fine. And then the HDMI 2.1 stuff, like I don't think I would buy a non-HDMI 2.1 TV that supported HDR and higher refresh rates.
Yeah. Again, though, like I said, that entry level LG OLED, if all you're ever going to do is watch TV and movies, that's never going to need more than 60 hertz. So you should be fine without it there, I believe.
Right, because the upscaling, the up refresh rate happens on the TV side.
Right.
They take the 60 hertz signal in and then scale it up on the scaler on the TV would be my guess. I don't know.
I should have looked this up. I think HDR works fine over 2.0.
Maybe at 60 hertz, I believe it does.
At any rate, if you care about games, you should get a TV with HDMI 2.1. Absolutely. Because that's where things are going. Actually, some of the TVs like this LG does not, but the newer Hisense goes up to 144 hertz, actually. And the TV makers seem more conscious of the fact that people are plugging PCs into TVs more often now.
Okay, so HDMI 2.0 supports 4K 60, usually over only one HDMI port. In order to get HDR and 4K 60, you need HDMI 2.0A, which I would assume the HDMI 2 LG TV probably supports.
I would assume it's the newest version of 2.0, which to further subdivide the complications here.
Yeah. HDMI 2.0B adds support for the HLG HDR format. And also same speeds, I believe. Got it.
So should we talk about refresh features in HDMI 2.1? Because there are some extra feators there that are.
Yeah, these are real quality of life things, I think, for the most part.
Yeah, so there's high refresh, like you said, it goes up to 120 hertz by spec. Although, like I mentioned, some TVs are now starting to ship with higher refreshes even than that.
I think variable refresh is more important than the high refresh. Though.
Yes. So within HDMI 2.1, there is variable refresh rate, which you know as G-Sync and FreeSync. Generally on PC monitors, it's the same basic idea of the display refresh can adjust dynamically along with the frame rate that it's getting.
Which means it just displays a frame when there's a frame, basically, right?
Right. Which helps with perceptions of smoothness and stuff like that. Another big feature to look for is auto low latency mode, which the TV will throw. My understanding is like the TV, the receiver, everything in the chain from the console on up will throw itself into its lowest latency possible mode. It'll disable all the cinema mode or things that have post processing on them that add input latency.
So this is like when you flip on game mode.
Yes, it's kind of the idea is kind of like everything puts itself into auto game mode when it detects.
Does it detect because they can detect the manufacturer of the things that's plugged in? So like when you plug an Xbox in, does it just know?
I don't know. I haven't used this setup enough to be able to speak to a lot of the nuances like that yet. I can tell you things like Dolby Vision will activate when I launch like I have an Xbox Series S here with me. Like when I launched Ori and Will of the Wisps or something, or Hitman 3 or something, like it'll black out for just a second and then come back up and a little Dolby Vision icon will pop in the top corner. So it definitely can auto detect stuff like HDR and do it properly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think some of that is also TV dependent. Like this TV has what they call a game optimizer on it, where you can tell it to do certain things when it detects, ALLM, VRR, stuff like that.
Okay.
There's a couple other features that I had never heard of until I was researching all this stuff and seeing mostly what wasn't supported on specs lists. Like I saw, for example, quick media switching is another HDMI 2.1 feature that was not supported on the receiver we ended up getting. What that is that it can change the frame rate without blacking out. You know how every time anything ever changes video modes since the history of video modes, the screen will just black out for like 3 or 4 seconds.
You got to reset your electron gun.
Yes, exactly. Right. So this is a feature of the HDMI spec. Now, it seems like it, from what I read on the site, on the HDMI site in the spec, It only works between 24 and 60 hertz. This does not go up into the higher refresh range.
That seems right.
But those are the three common like viewable content frame rates, right? Before you get into games, it's 24 frames for movies, 30 and 60 for TV generally. And as long as the resolution doesn't change, if all of your devices support this quick media switching feature, it can automatically just change the frame rate to different content without blacking out. It's just seamless.
Huh.
So that's a neat little convenience thing. But again, the receiver we got was too low end to support that. So there's also quick frame transport, which I'm guessing most things support, which just minimizes the amount of time frames are being transported across the interface. Like they say flat out in the spec, like, hey, we can't account for any extra latency in individual manufacturers' circuitry in their implementations. But as far as we're concerned, this is as low latency as we can make it. And even the low end receiver we bought did support that, so I'm guessing that's pretty widespread.
And do you turn this stuff on per port in the TV interface?
Not like that quick frame transport. I think that's just on at all times.
Okay.
Like I said, I had to go into we'll get to it, or should we just get into it? Mm-hmm. Should we just talk about should we wrap with some of my like basic?
I'm going to turn my chair around backwards and lean up against the headrest.
Yes. I showed my parents an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation last night. They were very impressed with the TV.
Which episode did you show them?
The one with Scotty.
Okay.
My dad's a big Scotty fan. So anyway, speaking of the Riker maneuver and after school specials. Anyway, excuse me. Yeah, like there have been some weird ups and downs in this. Like you asked about settings, if you have to go in and manually enable stuff. I wouldn't have thought that, but as one well, okay. Let me get to that in a minute. Let me talk about the receiver stuff first.
Yeah.
And why they had to go buy a new receiver, which made me very angry. So their TV was like 12, 13 years old. Their receiver was about 20 years old. But it's been working fine.
Digital 5.1 receiver era. Is that what we're talking about?
It did not have video inputs on it. That's how old it is. Like it was an audio only receiver.
I mean, it makes sense because like if I didn't have to plug in a bunch of consoles and there was a period of time when I had 12 devices plugged into my TV or something ridiculous because we were testing streaming boxes, I could have made do with a console and an Apple TV port on my TV for a really long time and just use the ports on the back of the TV.
That's exactly what they've been doing, and they have been using the optical out on their old TV into their old receiver, and that worked fine to get sound to the nice.
Love that toss link.
Yes, exactly. So all TVs still ship with optical ports, and I was like, well, whatever. Like this new TV will have an optical port. We'll just drop it right in, plug the optical into the receiver, and they'll be fine. Nope.
Let me guess. Is that a feature that nobody uses? So they probably have lightly tested it and it was kind of shitty.
That is pretty much exactly where it ended up. I spent 2 days trying to figure out why the optical, and I dragged the old TV back over to confirm that it was still working. Everything was fine. It just did not work on the new TV.
Didn't work at all?
Not at all. No audio, no nothing. Absolutely nothing. I'd Googled around a bunch. Apparently LG's optical audio out is absolute garbage. Like there are people everywhere complaining that especially high-end DACs and high-end amps. I mean, we're talking getting into the audiophile world, but there's tons of people out there saying like it doesn't work at all or it drops out constantly. And people have straight up done signal tests on it and basically have just determined that LG's implementation of optical audio out is shit. Wow. And I was very mad that something that should work on paper because, hey, like these are standard connectors. These are standard processes, right? Like if you have it, it should work, right? But it just didn't.
It's fascinating because I had the exact same experience with my Panasonic TV 12 years ago that resulted in the exact, like I literally trashed my old receiver and went out and bought a new receiver because I had the same exact problem then.
Now, I should admit, in addition to being 20 years old, the screen on that receiver also stopped working some years ago.
Oh, so you were doing it blind?
So we're doing it blind.
Oh, boy.
But all they needed to do is drive 2 speakers, right? Like they're not using it for anything elaborate down here. Whatever. It should have worked. On paper, it should have worked. But like, when it was like, okay, we probably have to buy a new receiver or take this TV back, one or the other. First of all, boxing this TV back up and getting it back over there seemed like such a nightmare. That was not appealing. But the other thing was like, hey, okay, well, then we're we'll get a low end receiver. At least the screen will work now.
They tasted the forbidden fruit of the HDR OLED by that point. And that thing wasn't going back.
That absolutely was a factor. They had already seen what it looked like at that point.
I mean, so the nice thing is on the new one, you can just use the ARC audio return. So and that
was the amusing thing. We ended up getting a Denon. There's a specific Denon. It's the budget pick on Wirecutter. If you want to go look it up, I don't have the model number. Actually, I do. If you really want to know, AVR S570BT. It's $300.
Wow, $300 is a low end receiver these days.
Yes, unfortunately. So I mean, originally I was like, all they need is a stereo receiver with optical in, although that probably doesn't even exist because why would you need optical on a 2-channel?
Only weirdos.
But point is, I started out looking at like, maybe they just need a little amp with optical on it, like some kind of little thing. But like all those boxes I could find for that specific bespoke purpose were like 3 times the cost of this receiver. Oh. And lower end receivers really don't exist below like $200. And those didn't have what we needed here. So like this is about as cheap as it gets in AV receivers these days. The nice thing though, discovering this is that like, do you do this occasionally? Well, you said you've thought about a TV upgrade before. Like occasionally you just kind of get the itch and you go like Google around and research what's out there a little bit and then end up not buying anything, but at least you know what's there.
The last time that happened, I literally was in the space where I had to spend like $3,000 to get enough HDMI ports to plug all my stuff in that were the right spec. And I was like, I'm just going to wait until these are better.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. The last time I Googled HDMI 2.1 receivers was 3, 4, maybe 5 years ago.
Yeah, you had like one HDMI 2.1 port on your receiver and one on the TV. And that was probably, almost certainly those would have to connect to each other. So you were hosed. Basically.
So they were much more limited. They were astronomically expensive. They were like $4. They were like $1,000. The early ones had a lot of teething pains. Like Yamaha had to replace the HDMI board in one of their models because it was like buggy out the door. It was just a mess, So like finding this Denon has 4 HDMI fully compliant HDMI 2.1 ports on it. Does all the audio stuff you need. Like it's pretty no frills, but like that's as receivers go, that's a pretty reasonable price. So it's nice to know that stuff has gotten cheaper and better and more fully featured. But that whole audio thing, I was just so
well. So then the thing about the audio also is you have to be thoughtful. If your receiver supports an audio spec, but your TV doesn't, then the thing that you want to like LG TVs used to not support DTS. So if you wanted to use DTS signals and your receiver supported DTS, those devices had to be plugged into the TV.
Yes.
And then the receiver would just suck out the audio and pass on the video,
yes. Which is how they're doing it now here.
Yeah. But it wouldn't go back over ARC, which has been that's a problem on Panasonic for years as well.
Yes. Yeah. I forgot to mention that like format wars are totally a thing. We talked about Samsung doesn't do Dolby Vision.
Yeah.
LG until this year's model does, but this old model that they bought, LG did not support DTS audio until this year. So there are still standards that you're going to find just randomly not supported on different models of things.
Yeah, it's the other thing I found is that like if you're bringing other devices in, then having old settings on them can cause real problems. Like, for example, Plex has a setting that's like, hey, I don't care about HDR, which makes sense on my TV at home. And when I carry my Apple TV down south for the month, because it's easier to do that than to log everything in and out on somebody else's TV. It was just not, the TV was thinking it was getting HDR displays because the Plex was like, yo, this is an HDR signal. And then it was also filtering the HDR signals down to SDR tone mapping on the fly. And anyway, it didn't work right. And it took me forever to figure out what it was. And it was because there was some weird setting that was stuck someplace.
Yes. Yeah. So to answer your question from a few minutes ago about settings, that was something I had to dig into that receiver and find after we got it home and set it up. This Series S that I have here, the Xbox is very good. I don't have PlayStation 5 here, so I can't test, but the Xbox is very good about just this like big summary screen that is just a bunch of green check marks and red X's that says, here's what your TV supports right now. Here's what it doesn't.
Yeah. Apple TV and PlayStation both do that,
okay, I believe. Okay. I'm sure that's standard, but it kept telling me that this setup did not support 4K 120. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. It should.
You got bad cable in that pipe, Brad. You need a 16K cable.
Yes. So like I actually mentioned this earlier. That's when I had to go into pretty deep into the Denon settings and probably found a category of setting that was just like input mode or something. And again, they were labeled as like 4K, 4K enhanced, 8K enhanced. But I don't know why they wouldn't just default the port to the best possible or to what it's getting or whatever. I had to manually go tell it, hey, put this in HDMI 2.1 mode so this Xbox can do what it does.
Yeah, that's weird. You'd think that like part of the whole deal of this is they're supposed to talk to each other and say, okay, here's what I do, and then everything's cool.
Yeah, it was odd.
But I'm like having to know about like the bummer about this is it's like shipping TVs with motion smoothing on, right? Like if you don't know to go look for this stuff, you're going to plug in your stuff that supports the good thing and you're going to get the less good thing out of it. It's probably, I mean, in reality, for most people, it's probably still better than the TV that they had before and the way it was all hooked up before. But theoretically, we shouldn't have to think about this shit.
Yes, you would think.
And like I kind of miss the whole let's plug in 3 RCA cables to get our component analog video into the thing, because that in retrospect seems pretty easy.
Yes, it sure does. Yeah, sure enough, this TV out of the box had all the motion smoothing turned on. It was defaulted to the picture mode that's like the super over bright, oversaturated, really garish looking one, you know?
Yeah.
I just went through the Arting's recommended settings for this thing and put everything down to like, here is the most accurate to the source material settings you can use.
Yeah,
it still looks amazing.
I do that every time we're in somebody's house. I'm a bad person.
Yeah. Well, this is their family. I feel like I can maybe make some recommendations about how the TV should look.
Well, with the motion smoothing stuff, it's one of those things. It's like if you're used to it, it looks good. Your brain thinks it looks good, right? It's like if you go back and watch MPEG 2 video now, you're like, oh man, that is really blocky and janky. But at the time, your brain got pretty good at filtering out those blocks. Same way we filter out H.264 compression, and eventually we'll filter out AV1 compression, artifacts, and all that stuff. Yeah. You get used to the motion smoothing and you're like, oh man, I really like everything looking like an Australian soap opera. That's exactly what I was hoping for. But Brad, I'm glad. So everybody's good now. You got some Women's World Cup on. What do you watch? What was the first thing they fired up on the new TV?
There will be some NASCAR on this on this TV for sure.
That's like that. Look, that can benefit from a better refresh rate and higher dynamic range. That sounds great.
That's the sporting event of choice here.
Okay.
They watch a ton of movies on TV though. They are big. They're big Apple TV Plus and Netflix fans.
Okay.
And
they got that foundation going.
Probably not so much.
No.
They had seen like half the stuff on Apple. Should mention real quick. Netflix still has a surcharge for 4K HDR.
Everybody does.
I know Apple TV Plus does not. Is that the outlier? I actually don't know.
I think that they are because, so I get HBO Max free with my AT&T cable subscription due to corporate mergers 5 years ago. And I don't have to pay extra for 4K for that. But everything else, as soon as I plugged into the 4K TV down there, it's like, hey man, if you want to get the most out of your TV, you should give us $10 a month more. I was like, I'm probably good.
Yes, Netflix definitely did that, but it was a pleasant surprise to find that their existing Apple TV Plus subscription, we could just watch all the stuff in the good quality. And
that was quite good, actually.
There have been numerous fairly slack-jawed comments around here the last 3 days about what a different experience it is watching this thing than what they had before.
You got to load up the Planet Earth is good. Thor Ragnarok, delightful. Okay. On the HDR.
Sure, I could see that. Yeah, I should probably go rent some stuff. I mean, that gets into a whole conversation out of scope for this episode about like, what are the digital rentals like in terms of things like bitrate? You know, like, is there actually a noticeable difference between, say, like an iTunes rental of a 4K Dolby Vision thing versus the UHD of it? I don't know.
So the last time I looked at this, it was a long time ago. The Apple TV ones were dramatically better than like Amazon and
that was my guess.
Yeah, they seem to care.
There's a couple movies. Yeah, yes. There's a couple of movies we're going to rent while I'm here, and I'm definitely going to get those from Apple.
Yeah. That whole thing is tricky because like, and of course, if you really care about that stuff, then the discs are going to be an infinitely higher bit rate than the streams, even the good streams. So, but everything's also AV1's coming and that changes the whole thing again. So
hey, just get ready for a whole new round of standards.
Yep.
To drop.
Let's do it.
Yeah, Yeah, it's been a weird experience. There's definitely some ups and downs. TVs may be too smart for their own good these days. I'm not sure. Currently wrestling with an issue where the C2 just powers itself off randomly. That I have not quite figured out yet.
That's weird.
Which is a little unsettling.
Is this going to push you to get a new TV, or are you still in the holding pattern?
No, I'm still in a holding pattern. It's going to be very hard to go home though. And the plasma still looks good, but I mean,
you use the TV to play games and stuff, right?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Which, like, whatever. Some people complain that, like, oh, why is it not playing games on modern TV? But like, I think there's value in seeing how things look on older technology, because there are tons of people still out there using it.
Well, and a lot of what I play, like I play most console games on my monitors in the office these days. So
yeah. I'm glad we did it though. Like they watch a TV show just about every night. I'm actually like shocked when I come out here how much they are caught up on like everything.
That's fascinating, because like my parents, like the TV they watch is fine with whatever they could watch on their phone if it was big enough. Sure. But
I mean, just in terms of the amount they're watching, like I'm kind of sure they have streaming services that I've never heard of. They have something called BritBox, which I'm not.
Oh yeah. You want your EastEnders? That's the place to get it. Yeah.
Yes, stuff like that. Anyway, the point is they watch a lot of television in the evenings, and I think they are going to enjoy this quite a bit. They have seemed extremely pleased with it so far.
Oh, that's good. Oh, I know. I had one last question for you. Just out of curiosity, when you went back to get the receiver, why the new receiver instead of the soundbar? It seems like the market as a whole has gone in the soundbar direction and away from the receiver direction.
Well, they already have speakers. Like, speakers already here and set up,
and they're not like offended by the big speakers and all that stuff.
No. They've had them for ages. They bought them actually.
They're committed to the big speaker lifestyle.
I don't know. Maybe we should. I've never used a soundbar personally. My understanding is full size speakers are still better. I mean, that kind of makes sense to me when you look at the amount of space that there is for cones in those things. Granted, they have probably a lot of cones in them now.
You're changing raw power for computation and a little bit of power, right?
Yeah. I always assumed that there was some trade off there, because they are smaller, and that's part of the advantage, right? Is that they don't take up a bunch of room on your floor.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
But mainly they already have the speakers in place, so it was easier to.
That makes sense.
A new receiver and continue using the speakers.
There you go. Well, thank you for the update on your, this has been a fascinating journey. I'm glad you got to spend some time with it. And of course, thank you also to our patrons.
Thank you, patrons.
Thank you, patrons. Without you all, we wouldn't be here. This is, of course, a 100% listener supported show. So if you would like to find out how to support Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod and keep the show going, you can go to patreon.com/techpod. Again, that's patreon.com/techpod. And for $5 a month, you get access to the monthly patron episode where we'll take questions. We got a good one in today from somebody who had said, hey, you guys recommended a board game that I really liked and my family's played a lot of. We would like to know more. And we're going to get into that next episode. But again, it's patreon.com/techpod. You also get access to the fabulous TechPod Discord, where we made a big change this morning, Brad.
Oh,
people are going to know when we recorded this now. We switched over the This Week's Episode forum channel from a single channel where all of the conversations about all of the episodes kind of intermingled, like a great big melange of feedback. And now we have a forum with individual threads for each channel.
Yes, I want to say that was a moderator suggestion. Is that right?
I think actually Korvac. No, that was a moderator suggestion.
Okay, I was just gonna say I don't know why we never thought of that before. That is quite obviously the way to go. Good call on that one.
I'm always hesitant to try new Discord features because sometimes they abandon them just when you get happy with them.
That is a fair concern, but you're right. People frequently in there, I see people saying like, "Oh, I'm just catching up. This is 5 episodes ago, but here's a comment." Now they have a more dedicated place to do that. The other thing, now that I see what is happening in there, I am delighted. People are just starting threads for random old episodes. Here is a thread for episode 24, the Mad Max Threshold.
Well, so I think that's up. I think that's up now for climate and flooding and
yes, yeah. But here's one on the Twitter episode. Here's episode 40.
That's a patron app.
Okay.
So that's the most recent Patreon app.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
So
anyway, it's a nice little mishmash of episodes in there.
Yeah. And if people have requests for specific forums, you can hit somebody in Thread Club or one of us up and we'll create them. We're trying to keep the number of posts in that section low just so the signal to noise is pretty good. And I think we're just going to see how it goes. It's an experiment. I already feel pretty good about it, though. People seem to be enjoying it. So that's what's happened on the Patreon, on the Discord. It's patreon.com/techpod. It's $5 a month for the Discord and Patreon episode tier. And we really appreciate the support, especially from everybody, but especially from our executive producer tier patrons, including Andrew Slosky, Bunny Fiend, Paddle Creek Games, makers of Fractured Veil, David Allen, James Kamek, Joel Krauska, Jordan Lippett, Just Wedge 3.0, Nick Johnston, Twinkle Twinkie, and Pantheon, makers of the HS3 high-speed 3D printer. Thank you all so much. We appreciate you.
Yes, we do.
And I guess it's going to do it for us this week.
Yeah.
We will be back next week with another edition of Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. Thanks for listening, everybody. See you all then. Bye.